When we factor, we need to find the greatest common factor in order to be able to complete the factoring ahead of you. When I do this, I find it helpful to kind of think of how the numbers are made sometimes. So what makes 5x squared? Well, what makes 5x squared is you can think of 5x squared like 5 times x times x. And you can think of 20x in a couple different ways. You can think of 20x as 20 times x, or you can even break 20 even further down, and we can kind of break 20 up into 4 times 5, and then we also know that that's times x. So inside this crazy thought bubble of mine, when you're thinking about factors, then you got to look at what's common between the two. So in both of these, we can see that there's a 5 times x and a 5 times x in both of these. And that's what our common factor, or our greatest common factor, would be. So that's going to be what we're going to factor out. So the process we discussed in class was that the next step would be to write your equal sign and rewrite your expression. Then you're going to divide all your terms by the greatest common factor. So I'm going to divide by 5x and 5x. Where did I get 5x from? That's that greatest common factor we figured out that is shared between both our terms, 5x squared and 20x. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to then drop down my brackets, and once I do my math, I write what I'm factoring out on the outside of my brackets, and you can represent this or write it in brackets. And then you have to do the math. So what is 5x squared divided by 5x? And that's going to be, so 5 divided by 5 is 1. X squared divided by x is just x. Minus, our x's cancel out, so these here would actually just cancel out. And what's negative 20 divided by 5? That's negative 4. And that's what's left over. So our factored expression, this would be kind of our expression right here, and our factored expression would be 5x bracket x minus 4. Okay, so in this example, I have to factor negative 2x squared minus 6x. So there's our expression. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brainstorm and look at our two terms here, and I'm going to think, what do these two terms have in common? You can see they're both even numbers, and I'm going to look at them and know that 2 is a factor of both. So I'm going to write down in my brainstorm that their greatest common factor is definitely a 2. So that's something that's shared between them. Is there anything else that's shared between them? I can see they both have an x in them. So I can, and they both have at least 1. So I can write 2x. One thing that's good form to do when you're factoring is once factored, that what's left over is a positive value. So by factoring out negative 2x, what we're going to be able to be left with is the first term being positive. So here's an example how this is going to work. So I'm going to write my equal sign. I'm going to rewrite my expression. Then I'm going to divide all terms by what I'm factoring out. Okay, so now that I've done that, now I'm ready to divide. So what's negative 2 divided by, first I write out what I'm factoring out. I put that in brackets. Next, what's left over after I've factored negative 2x out? So what's negative 2? What's negative 2 divided by negative 2? That would be positive 1. And you don't have to write that 1. It's there, but that's the one that's there. And I'm not going to write that 1 just because in math we don't usually write our 1s. And then I know that x squared divided by x is just x. Next, what's negative 6 divided by negative 2? That's going to be positive 3. And here, like before, our x's, since they are both power of 1, cancel out, and so we're left over with negative 2x bracket x plus 3. And you'll notice now that our first term in what's being factored, that x term right here is positive, and that's generally good or accepted form. Alright, so for my last example, I'm just going to take a second, and again I'm going to brainstorm our greatest common factor. And when I look at our greatest common factors for these three terms, I can see that not all three of them have an x variable within their terms, so I can know that that's not a common factor, right? I can't factor out an x. But I do notice that 14, 21, and 35 are all factors, or have the greatest common factor of 7. So from there, what I can do is, after I've kind of figured out this greatest common factor, chop my equal sign down, 14 x to the power of 3, 21 x squared minus 35. I am now going to divide all my terms by 7. I then take 7 and write it on the outside of the brackets. 14 divided by 7 is 2x cubed. Negative 21 divided by 7 is negative 3x squared. And sorry about that. And negative 35 divided by 7 is negative 5. So I've successfully factored that, and for right now, that's as far as we can go.